I grew up in a town called Baxter, Minnesota. It's a very small town. You don't go anywhere without popping into somebody you know. And starting in the 6th grade, I started to do figure skating competitively. Figure skating taught me a lot about discipline, taught me a lot about working towards a goal. You fall down a lot and you can get discouraged very often, but the key is to pick yourself back up, forget that, and move on in your program. And so figure skating was not only a sport that I loved and I was so passionate about, but it taught me a lot about myself. There's such a large mental aspect to the sport. You're thinking very hard, but on the outside you have to look so graceful and very put together, even if everything inside of you is screaming that you feel scared. And there was something that I loved about challenging myself with things that I never thought I would be able to accomplish. So my younger brother Will was diagnosed with diabetes a month after he turned 5 years old. And my parents brought my brother Thor and I into the living room to tell us the news. And so I remember that next day when I went to school, I went down and walked down to the elementary school library and asked the librarian, could I get any books about diabetes? And all the books that they had were medical type books, which as a 5th grader, I couldn't grasp the information of what had just happened to my younger brother. I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 13 years old. I was in the 7th grade at the time, and because Will had already had diabetes for just over 2 years, my mom recognized the symptoms. She asked me to test my blood sugar. I told her she was crazy. You know, I had just not been feeling well recently. It must have been a bout with the flu. She obviously wasn't listening to me. She hadn't, she said, you're testing your blood sugar on his machine. So I remember testing my blood sugar on his machine and the 30 seconds counting down. And I remember thinking, there is no way. And when that meter stopped and came out, all it said was HI. And what that means is your blood sugar is so high, it cannot read on that meter. When the news came that I officially had type 1 diabetes, I was so in denial because it was never on my radar that I would be the one getting type 1 diabetes, that I wanted nothing to do with it. I was embarrassed, I was ashamed. I just couldn't accept the terms of it. And so it wasn't actually until about a year later that my mother had heard that there was actually a camp where only children with diabetes go to summer camp. They dropped me off, and I thought, I remember just crying in my bunk bed, thinking this is not the life I had planned for myself. But the interesting thing is that week changed my life, because it was the first time in my life that I had been surrounded by other people my age living with type 1 diabetes. And I realized at that point that though I didn't have a choice to get diabetes, I had the choice on how I was going to react to getting that diagnosis. Type 1 diabetes, I always say, is this very complicated balancing act that every single moment of your life you're having to think about. And the toughest thing with type 1 diabetes is, and what I hear from so many people that I talk with along my travels, is you don't get a day off from it. But just like figure skating, you learn to pick yourself up, you learn to wipe the slate clean, and you learn to go on to your next move. When Will was diagnosed, and even when I was diagnosed at 13, there was a lack of information that made sense to me, and I needed that desperately. Here I was, a 13-year-old girl, lost, and I needed somebody to say they knew where I was coming from and that it was going to be okay. That's where I come from in how I speak, in how I write. You know, I'm this small town girl from Baxter, Minnesota. I am simply saying what life has been like living with type 1 diabetes, and to be able to fully relate to people and to have people understand that information. You have to be on their same level. I am fueled by the 10-year-old girl that went to the library.